Hey, this is Bunny. I'm so glad you're here with me today. Whether you're painting along, organizing your bits box, or just relaxing with the sound of stories in the background, today's topic is one of my absolute favorites when it comes to tabletop characters. We're going to talk about why we love heroes with flaws. The imperfect adventurers, the messy spellcasters, the rogues who mean well but catastrophically fail their stealth checks, and the paladins who try so hard to live up to their ideals, but still stumble along the way. There's something deeply human about flawed heroes, something that pulls us in and makes their stories more meaningful. And while you paint whatever you're painting, or watch me paint whatever I'm painting, we're going to sink into that together and explore why those imperfections matter so much in our games, our stories, and even the characters we create for ourselves. When we sit down to create a new character, whether it's for Dungeons and Dragons or any tabletop RPG, we often start with an idea of who the character could be. Maybe they're a fierce warrior, confident and strong. Maybe they're a brilliant wizard with a lifetime of study under their belt. Maybe they're a charismatic bard who has never once paid for a drink because they can talk their way out of anything. And those archetypes are fun. They resonate with us for good reason. But the moment we add a flaw, everything becomes far more interesting. Suddenly that warrior isn't just strong, maybe they're insecure because they spent their whole life trying to prove themselves. That brilliant wizard might have a chip on their shoulder because they were the worst student at the academy until something finally clicked. And maybe that charismatic bard is secretly terrified of rejection and masks it with bravado. The moment a flaw enters the picture, the character becomes a person. They have dimension, they have weight, they have emotional gravity. It's the difference between painting a miniature with just the base color and painting one where you're adding shading and highlights, tiny scratches on the armor, and little imperfections that give it character. One is technically finished, the other feels alive. Another reason we love flawed heroes is because flaws create story momentum. A perfect hero has nowhere to go. They just continue being perfect. And frankly, that's not all that fun to watch, and it's even less fun to play. But a hero with flaws has arcs ahead of them. They have lessons to learn, people to disappoint, decisions to regret, choices to make, redemptions to seek, and victories that feel earned rather than expected. A character who makes mistakes opens doors for storytelling that simply don't exist with a flawless protagonist. In tabletop gaming, those imperfections are what create memorable moments. Think of all the stories players share with each other. The legendary disasters, the shocking betrayals, the times someone tried something bold and it suddenly went horribly wrong, or surprisingly right. So often the most unforgettable moments aren't the perfect bits. They're the natural ones, the spectacular failures, the choices that seemed good at the time and proved disastrous. We remember flawed heroes because their stories feel like stories worth telling. Flaws also act like little narrative hooks the world can grab into. When you share your character flaw with your DM, you're basically saying, here's a lever you're allowed to pull. Maybe your character has a strong sense of pride. That becomes an opening for rivals who challenge their ego, or situations where they have to swallow that pride to protect someone else. Maybe your character is hopelessly curious. That becomes a doorway to trouble as they poke at artifacts and forbidden doors or read contracts they definitely shouldn't sign. These flaws are not punishments, they're invitations. They invite complications and scenes and emotional beats that wouldn't exist otherwise. Without them, the story has fewer ways to interact with the character's inner world. It's a bit like painting a miniature with a cape or a flowing cloak. That extra surface gives you room to play with light and shadow and movement. You have more space to tell a visual story. Character flaws do the same for roleplay. They give the DM more folds and surface to catch the light and shadow of the narrative. And as players, when we watch our heroes wrestle with their flaws, we feel more invested in where they're going. We're no longer just interested in whether the party defeats the dragon, we're also invested in whether the bard finally apologizes, whether the ranger finally forgives themselves, or whether the warlock chooses to walk away from a bad pact. Those emotional victories become just as exciting as the big combat wins. A paladin smiting a demon is cool. A paladin failing to persuade a shopkeeper because they're too awkward to negotiate? That's iconic. Sometimes, when we first start building characters, especially if we're newer to tabletop games, we feel this pressure to make them good at everything. We want high stats and powerful abilities and cool backstories that sound impressive on paper. It's a very natural instinct. Nobody sits down at a fantasy table thinking, I hope my character's mediocre. But the funny thing is, the characters we end up loving the most are often the ones who aren't the best at everything. They're the ones who have obvious blind spots and little weaknesses the whole table can see, and patterns of behavior that cause problems in hilarious or heartfelt ways. Think about your favorite characters from books, movies, or shows. How many of them are interesting because of their mistakes, their vulnerabilities, their temper, or their stubbornness? Those are the traits that stick with us. In D&D, this becomes even more vivid because we're not just watching a flawed hero, we're embodying one. We roll the dice knowing our character might fail, and we choose to lean into that. We decide that the wizard who's studied for decades still blurts things out at the wrong time. We decide that the rogue who's a master of stealth is absolutely hopeless at reading emotions. We decide that the cleric who can channel divine power has absolutely no idea how to handle compliments. These aren't mechanical disadvantages. They're narrative choices. They add a layer of personality on top of whatever's on the character sheet. Just like adding glazes or edge highlights takes a miniature beyond its base coat, these flaws push our characters beyond their stats and into the realm of story. Flawed heroes also make the game feel collaborative. When everyone at the table has rough edges and shortcomings and little character quirks, it creates space for teamwork. If your hero can do everything flawlessly on their own, why does the party even matter? But when a hero struggles, when they falter, when their flaw actually gets them into trouble, suddenly they need help. And that's when bonds form. That's when trust develops. That's when the cleric steps in not just to heal a wound, but to talk them through a mistake. That's when the rogue covers for the wizard that set the inn on fire. That's when the barbarian learns to laugh at themselves because the whole party is laughing with, not at them. The flaw becomes the glue that holds the group together. It's the same kind of dynamic you get when you're painting minis with friends. You compare mistakes and you laugh about them. You learn something new because someone else struggled with the same thing. Imperfection creates connection. Another beautiful thing about Flawed Heroes is that they allow players to explore themes they might not otherwise have a chance to explore. A flaw can be healing. A flaw can be cathartic. A flaw can be a safe way to process big feelings in a small, fictional container. If someone's character fears abandonment, that flaw might allow them to slowly confront that fear in the story, where they're supported and listened to and valued by their in-game friends. If a character is stubborn or reckless or overly protective, those traits might reflect something the player wants to examine in themselves, or something they simply find compelling in storytelling. We don't always explore our deepest questions directly. Sometimes we paint them in metal and plastic, give them hit points and a backstory, and let the dice roll decide when the breakthrough happens. In miniature painting, flaws also play an essential role. Anyone who's been painting longer than 10 minutes knows the first truth of the hobby. Mistakes happen constantly, and perfection is out of reach. You slip, you overbrush, you flood a recess, you highlight a little too harshly, you get a fingerprint in the varnish. It's all part of the process. And the wild thing is, more often than not, those mistakes can be worked with. A slip of metallic paint becomes weathering. A messy glaze becomes a shadow. A blotchy color becomes texture. Painting and character creation share this same philosophy. The flaw becomes the opportunity. The imperfection becomes the thing that makes the final result real. If you've ever painted a mini and thought, well, that did not go how I planned, you already know this feeling. Maybe you tried a new color scheme and halfway through it, it looked completely wrong. Maybe you highlighted a face a little too starkly and the character looked more startled than heroic. In the moment, you have a choice. Strip it and start over, or see if you can lean into what's happening. Sometimes that wrong color becomes a unique skin tone that sets the character apart. Sometimes that harsh highlight becomes a scar or a magical glow. Sometimes the mini ends up telling you who the character is instead of the other way around. And once you've had that experience a few times, you stop seeing imperfections as disasters and start seeing them as doors. Flawed heroes function the same way. When a character makes a bad decision, it can feel frustrating in the moment, both for the character and the player, but those choices often lead to new possibilities. A grudge that forms, a friendship that deepens, a rivalry that sparks into something meaningful. And just like learning to work with paint instead of fighting it, we learn to work with our characters instead of forcing them to behave perfectly all the time. Over time, you develop confidence, not just in your technical skills, but in your ability to adapt. You start trusting that even when things go sideways, on the table or in the narrative, you'll find a way to turn that something into something cool. So when we talk about why we love heroes with flaws, we're also talking about why we love art with flaws, why we love stories with wrinkles, why we love moments that go wildly off script, because that's where the humanity is. A flawless miniature is beautiful, sure, but one with tiny dents and rough surfaces and the subtle signs of use feels like an artifact of a lived life. A flawless hero is impressive, but a flawed hero is relatable. Let's talk about relatability for a moment, because this is one of the deepest reasons flawed heroes resonate with us. Every human being has imperfections. Every human being knows what it feels like to fail, to feel uncertain, to wish they had done something differently. When we see those qualities in a fictional hero, it creates connection. It makes us care more deeply. It gives us hope, because if they can rise above their flaws, maybe we can too. One of the most powerful things a player can experience at the D&D table is the moment their character does something brave despite their flaw. A timid ranger stepping into the front lines to protect the party. A panicky wizard standing firm against their fear because someone they love is in danger. A rogue who's used to working alone finally trusting someone with the truth. Those moments don't happen in spite of flaws. They happen because of them. The flaw is what makes the courage meaningful. When you look back on your favorite characters that you've played, chances are you don't remember their exact attack bonus or how many spell slots they had at level 5. What you remember are the moments when their flaws and their bravery collided. Maybe your anxious wizard stood between the party and a threat, voice shaking but staff steady. Maybe your young, arrogant fighter finally admitted they were wrong and apologized to a party member they'd hurt. Maybe your chaotic rogue chose not to steal something for once because it mattered to someone they cared about. In each of those moments, the flaw didn't vanish. It was still there, still part of who they were. The heroism came from acting in spite of it. That kind of growth is far more satisfying than a flawless victory. That's one of the big reasons flawed heroes feel so comforting. They send a quiet message. You don't have to be perfect to do something worthwhile. You don't have to have everything figured out to show up for the people around you. You don't even have to stop being messy to contribute something meaningful. You just have to keep trying. In our real lives, we often carry around this expectation of improvement that will someday become finished, like a perfectly painted mini that never needs another brushstroke. But the truth is, we're all works in progress, just like the characters on our character sheets. Flawed heroes remind us that we're allowed to be in progress and still be valuable, still be loved, still be the protagonist of our own story. Flaws also create tension, and tension creates investment. When you're painting, part of the joy is that little thrill, the risk of messing something up. If everything were effortless, we'd get bored. In the same way, a hero whose choices always succeed doesn't really create tension. But a hero who might fail, who might slip into old habits, who might make a decision their friends will struggle with, that's where the emotional investment grows. And in D&D specifically, flaws give the DM something to work with. They open narrative doors. They create conflict that isn't just punch the goblin. It's, what do you do when your flaw is challenged? It turns story from something passive into something dynamic. Through flaws, characters stop reacting to the plot and they start shaping it. From a DM's perspective, flaws are a little like signposts that say, here's what this player is interested in exploring. If a character's flaw is tied to anger, the DM might introduce situations that test their temper. Unfair authority figures or moral dilemmas or enemies who know exactly how to push their buttons. If the flaw is tied to fear, the DM might gently present scenarios where the character has a chance to either reinforce that fear or grow past it. None of this has to be heavy or dark. It can be playful, heartfelt, or even comedic. But when flaws are present, the story becomes more personal because it interacts with who the character is, not just what they can do. Players can help with this too, by being open about what kind of story they want. If you tell your DM, hey, my character's flaw is that they feel they're only valuable when they're useful. I'd love for that to be challenged. You're giving them a gift. You're saying, here's where you can aim that spotlight. And then, during play, you can lean into those moments instead of avoiding them. It's like deliberately choosing a challenging color scheme for a mini because you know the end result will be worth the effort. You're choosing complexity over simplicity, depth over ease, and in exchange you get a richer, more memorable campaign. Another reason we adored flawed heroes is because they surprise us. A perfect hero is predictable. They'll always make the honorable choice, always say the right thing, always swing their sword with unwavering precision. But a flawed hero? They might freeze. They might lash out. They might run away. They might crack a joke at the worst possible time. They might try something ridiculous that derails everything. Flawed heroes keep the story alive because they're not bound to the expected. They're capable of growth, regression, rebellion, transformation, the whole range of human experience because they mirror us. And that unpredictability leads to some of the most memorable gaming moments you'll ever have. We also love flawed heroes because they make triumph sweeter. When a character has struggled, really struggled, and they finally overcome something, it feels earned. If a character has always been confident, a victory is just another Tuesday. But if a character has always been afraid, and this time they push through it, it hits different. It feels like something you want to celebrate. It's just like painting a miniature that has fought you every step of the way. The primer was weird and the paint dried funny and the highlights kept streaking. Nothing behaved the way it was supposed to. But then suddenly, finally, it comes together. And that miniature becomes one of your favorites. Not because it was easy, but because it wasn't. Now let's talk specifically about D&D character flaws and how they enhance role-playing. A flaw isn't just a quirk. It's a doorway. A flaw shapes motivation, relationships, decision-making, and narrative agency. It helps players get into their characters' heads and inhabit them in a richer, more meaningful way. A flaw can be a source of humor. A flaw can be a source of heartbreak. A flaw can be a source of growth. A flaw can be a source of conflict that isn't destructive to the group but transformative to the story. And importantly, a flaw doesn't have to be dramatic. It can be something small and simple. Maybe your fighter hates water. Maybe your wizard is picky about food. Maybe your cleric is afraid of spiders. And maybe your barbarian desperately wishes they were better at poetry. These little touches make the characters feel real. The best flaws are rarely the ones that hold characters back completely. They're the ones that challenge them in interesting ways. And that's something a lot of people misunderstand about character creation. A flaw shouldn't shut down a story. It should open up a story. A flaw shouldn't paralyze the character. It should give them something to push against. When you're painting, you want contrast. Dark against light and warm against cold. Without contrast, the piece looks flat. Character flaws are a form of contrast. They create emotional depth. They give the story places to go. They give the player something to hold on to when deciding how their character reacts. If you're thinking about how to design good flaws for your next character, a useful question to ask yourself is, how will this actually show up at the table? A vague flaw like secretive is just a starting point, but it becomes more powerful when you decide how that secrecy manifests. Do they avoid answering personal questions? Do they keep vital information from the party because they're afraid of being judged? Do they lie about their past even when the truth would help? The more concrete the behavior, the easier it is to play. In the same way that you don't just say, "This mini is worn," you paint specific scratches and chips and weathering. You don't just say this character has flaws. You decide where those flaws crack the surface. It also helps to think about how your flaws interact with the rest of the group. A flaw that constantly shuts down scenes, like refuses to ever cooperate, can be frustrating for everyone. But a flaw that occasionally complicates things while still leaving room for teamwork is amazing. Maybe your character is competitive in a friendly way, always trying to outdo the others, but backing them up when it counts. Maybe they're impulsive, leaping into action and forcing the party to improvise, but always in a way that keeps everyone engaged and laughing. Good flaws create play, not problems. They give people something to bounce off, like a carefully sculpted base on a miniature gives them something interesting to look at from every angle. And here's a really fascinating part of why flawed heroes resonate with us. Sometimes, characters keep the flaws they start with, but sometimes those flaws evolve. Not disappear, evolve. A character doesn't have to fix their flaws to grow. They might just learn to manage it or embrace it or transform it into something new. Growth isn't about becoming perfect. It's about becoming truer. For example, a character who starts out selfish might become protective. They didn't stop being self-focused entirely. They just changed who they cared most about. A character who begins with fear might gain courage, not by eliminating fear, but by acting through it. A character who struggles with trust might open up slowly, not suddenly becoming an open book. The evolution is incredibly compelling to watch and play because it mirrors real life. Our flaws rarely vanish. We just learn to live with them better. Another wonderful thing about flawed heroes is that they make the whole table more comfortable to play. When someone creates a perfectly optimized character with no weaknesses, it can inadvertently intimidate the rest of the group. But when characters are messy, imperfect, occasionally chaotic, everyone feels freer to play, freer to explore, freer to make mistakes. It sets a tone. We're here to have fun, not be flawless. It's the same energy that happens when painters share their progress shots online. Nobody likes posting the super messy middle stage, but when people do, it's incredibly encouraging. It shows that art isn't magic, it's process. And character creation is exactly the same. Ultimately, we love heroes with flaws because they remind us that stories, like people and like art and like games, aren't about perfection. They're about expression. They're about growth. They're about the shared experience of creating something together, whether that's a mini with layered washes and tiny eye highlights, or an adventurer whose personality has evolved over dozens of sessions. A flawed hero isn't less heroic. A flawed hero is heroic. They try even when they shouldn't have to. They grow even when it's hard. They fall and they get back up again. They embody the truth that greatness is not about never failing. It's about being shaped by those failures into something more resonant, more meaningful, and more human. And that's why flawed heroes matter. That is why we love them. That is why they stay with us long after the campaign ends or the mini is sealed and placed on the shelf. Their imperfection makes them unforgettable. Their struggles make them inspiring. And their humanity, even in a world of dragons and magic, is what makes fantasy feel real. If you look at your miniature shelf, you might notice that some pieces are objectively painted better than others. Smoother blends, cleaner lines, more confident techniques. But they're not always the ones you're most attached to. Sometimes your favorite mini is the one you painted early on, when you didn't know any rules and just went with your instincts. Maybe the cloak is a little chalky and the eyes are a bit wonky. But that figure carries the memories of a character who failed gloriously, loved fiercely, or changed the direction of a whole campaign. Art and story get tangled together, and the technical imperfections become part of the charm. They're not things you want to erase. They're proof that you were there, learning, trying, playing. Flawed heroes work the same way in our memories. We might later build characters who are more mechanically elegant, more optimized, more balanced. But there will always be that one disaster sorcerer who miscast everything, or that one broody ranger who eventually learned to joke, or that one bard who tried to fix every problem with a song and somehow made things worse half the time. Those characters stay with us because they were vivid. They made us feel something. In the end, that's what good storytelling does, whether it's on a page, on a canvas, or at a gaming table. It makes us feel. And flawed heroes are one of the most reliable ways to tap into that feeling again and again, every time we roll the dice. That's it for today. What's your favorite flawed hero you've ever played or painted? I'd love to hear about them in the comments. I hope you'll be back with us next time. Bye!